C. Be more productive and efficient? Can the NNPC be made more productive and efficient? We're asking this question because the NNPC just released its first audited accounts in a long time, and it's not looking very good. Here's today's big hard fact. In 2018, NNPC's refineries generated 3.45 billion naira in revenue, but gulped 160.13 billion naira in expenses. So basically, the refineries are running at a loss. It's worse than a loss, Seth, if you think about it. They're basically not productive. Kaduna Refinery did not make any money, no revenue at all. But it spent 64.68 billion naira in 2018. Salaries, administrative costs, operational costs, all of that. For a refinery that did not make a single naira. Port Harcourt Refinery isn't much better. It sure made some sales worth 1.46 billion, but it spent 48 billion naira. And here to talk about it is the chief economist at PwC Nigeria, Andrew Nevin. Thank you so much for joining us on Hard Facts, sir.
Very happy to be with you, Sandra.
Yes. Now, as we talk with Andrew, I want to hear from you, Lagos, calling with your thoughts, sending your messages. Do you think the refineries should be privatized? Do you think there is a way that we can get the NNPC to work more effectively? Do you think oil prices are going to stabilize this year? Well, from the news today, the business news today, I don't think so. But what do you think? And what do you think about the government's revenue situation? These are the things I'd like to hear from you. So WhatsApp is 080-959-75805. And our phone number is 0700-993-993-993. Andrew, the NNPC just published its audited accounts. Can you explain what audited financial statements are and how they differ from unaudited financial statements?
So with an unaudited financial statement, the company puts its own numbers together and releases them, and there's no independent verification. Audited statements are audited by outsiders, professional auditors. Of course, globally, the four big audit firms, KPMG, EY, PwC, and Ernst & Young. So the four of them. And so audited means they've had independent verification. Of course, all public companies are required to be audited independently, usually by one of the big four.
I see. How deep does a forensic audit go? How granular is it? What level of detail about particular line items of spending and revenue is an audit expected to generate?
Well, you used the word forensic, so this is not a forensic audit. And an audit, a forensic audit would go much deeper. But in an audit that is for, say, a publicly listed company, one of the important pieces of it is that the auditor is relying that the information provided by management is accurate. If management is actually trying to commit a crime or cover up something and providing false data, that's not something that the auditor can easily find out. And of course, we have cases like Enron, which I'm sure many people are too young, but some may be old enough to remember in 2001, which was the largest bankruptcy in history at the time. And the company was deliberately falsifying information in that case. So it's difficult. An auditor won't necessarily catch criminal activity. But if there's no criminal activity, it should be giving a fairly accurate view of the company's position.
I see. All over the world, Andrew, refineries make some money, right? Nigeria has a massive demand for refined oil products. We ship in billions of dollars worth of petrol and other products every year. So obviously there's a local market, yeah? So how come our refineries can't make money?
Well, I think the experience in Nigeria, certainly the more than 10 years that I've lived here, is that it's difficult for state-owned enterprises to run, or the state to run successful enterprises. And refining is not a complex technology. There are refineries of all scales all over the world. And yeah, we've had the 3 NNPC refineries essentially non-functional, really struggling. We have Agiokuta Steel. I mean, I think we would be at PwC, like many others in the camp, that said, look, the refining is something that can easily be done by the private sector. And we have such a need for education spending, for health spending, for security spending in the country, that to divert resources to lose money refining seems like an incredible waste and shame for Nigeria.
Do you think privatization is the answer? We've heard people call for the privatization of the refineries before. In fact, I remember President Obasanjo tried to start the process, but other people say that nobody would want to buy the refineries as they currently stand. What do you think?
Well, I think that if you look at the whole sort of upstream and downstream industry, I think what we've, and of course, these things need more careful study, but what we've said over the years is the starting point, there needs to be a separation of the roles as a regulator and the role as an operator at the NNPC. So there's more clarity. The PIB was in that direction, but we've had challenges doing that. We've also recommended to bring transparency, and really credit to NNPC and the MD CEO to doing the audit. I mean, the numbers don't look great, but at least he stepped up and said we're going to be more transparent. He's promised to have an audit for 2019. So I think it's a positive step forward. On the operating side, I mean, there's many successful, like upstream side, so the production of oil and gas, there's many successful state-owned oil and gas companies around the world, so there's nothing wrong with that. But we've said that it might be helpful if we did what we call a partial listing. So we take something like NLNG, which is very successful, and we float, say, 30% of it on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So that would do a few things. One, it would mean there'd be more capital put into it. Two, it would mean it would have to be audited and transparent because it now has outside shareholders. Three, it would give a chance for Nigerian investors, well, global investors, but certainly Nigerian investors and PFAs to be able to invest in NLNG and ensure the separation between the operations of the unit and the regulation and the sort of the overall government interest in the sector. But for the refineries, it doesn't seem that compelling that the state has to own a refinery. I'm not sure how many countries in the world where refining is owned by the state. It's not the owner of the natural resource. The resource is the oil that's in the ground. Once it gets the refinery, it seems to us perfectly sensible the private sector could take that on. And Mr. Dangote, of course, is building the world's largest refinery since, I think, the 1950s at 650,000 barrels per day. So on balance, yeah, the refineries should probably be privatized. Now, whether these are salvageable or not or have zero value, I'm not so sure. That would need to be studied. But the continued drain of resources, of Nigerian resources, into these refineries not producing anything is really very, very painful and needs to come to an end.
Some Nigerians, another reason a lot of Nigerians have a problem with privatizing the refineries is patriotism or a fear of corruption in the privatization process. Do you think it would be an indictment on the country or the government to sell off the refineries?
Well, in patriotism, Mr. Dangote stepped up with one of the world's largest capital projects in the last few decades. I mean, that's fully Nigerian, Africa's most successful businessman. I mean, fully Nigerian. So, and of course, the refineries, there's lots of talented indigenous Nigerian companies, the downstream, midstream companies that could take on the refineries. I'm not sure that it really is that critical who owns them. If I have to take, I'm Canadian. I mean, I think our refineries, to be honest, are largely owned by outsiders. It doesn't affect the flow of oil. It doesn't affect how we view ourselves. It doesn't affect, the fact that Canadians are good business people. I mean, refining is, I don't think, a source of necessarily national pride. I can imagine, say, an airline or the upstream production is, but I don't think we should be too focused on that for the downstream. And of course, we've also there's lots of Nigerian companies that are attempting to do modular refineries. So these are smaller refineries that the government's encouraged, but it's been difficult the last 2 or 3 years to get those launched. But again, those will be owned and controlled by Nigerians.
So the NNPC audit report goes beyond just the refineries. It looks at all the NNPC subsidiaries, including NAPIMS, the National Petroleum Investment Management Service. And they made a profit of about 1 trillion naira in 2018. They handle stuff like JVs and gas. So I have to ask if NAPIMS proves that the oil and gas sector can still be viable, can still be a viable source of revenue for the Nigerian government if it is, for instance, managed more professionally.
Well, I think there's no question, as I said before. I mean, there are lots of very well-managed state-owned oil companies around the world, and they are managed well. The production costs are low. So, I mean, there's nothing intrinsically impossible about doing that. But, I mean, a couple of issues here. I mean, one, to begin with, I mean, we do need what the MDCEO is doing in terms of more transparency. And I think over the years, I think people understand, and the NNPC itself has said it. It's been talking to the Senate about it, that the costs in NNPC are too high. So our production costs are too high in Nigeria, which means that the revenue that ultimately goes to the government is too low. As I said earlier, that's one of the reasons we like the idea of partial privatization, because then you bring transparency, you bring some pressure to run the organization well because you have outside shareholders. But what's happening now is with the collapse of crude oil prices because of COVID-19, we're back in a place where the very little revenue is going to be flowing from the oil, from NNPC to the allocation account. We're going to have immediate pressure on at both the federal level, state level, and of course the local government as those allocations drop on that. So it's it's an urgent task. But people have seen in the press, there's already a lot of discussion about how do we get the production cost down. The number that's floated publicly is the average production cost of NNPC oil is about $25. The Bonnie Light, of course, always trades at a discount to Brent, so it's between, say, 35 and 37, I think, today. So that's not much margin that's going to be able to flow to the federal government. So certainly getting that $25 down to $15 is critical. But at a more general level, if you think about it, even if we produce 2 million barrels a day of oil in Nigeria, that number hasn't changed, largely for decades. And the number of people in Nigeria goes up at 3% a year, which means every 5 years, even if we stayed at the same amount of oil, there's 15% less oil per person. So as a percentage of, let's call it the value creation in Nigeria, oil is just going down and down and down. And that's what we need to recognize. So I think NNPC by itself cannot fix Nigeria's economic challenges.
Now, I want to take a step back, right, and look at the economics of oil and gas right now, because it's so important to the government's bottom line. You mentioned that because of COVID-19, oil has taken a hit, but oil has also bounced back a little bit from the bad situation that it was in early this year. But there seems to be a second wave of COVID-19 worldwide, and China may start closing back up again. Do you think oil is going to stay up long term?
Well, we've always said,
or even short to mid term.
Yeah, I mean, we've always said, first off, in terms of managing or leading the country, Nigeria should be able to cope with $20 oil, $40 oil, $60 oil, $80 oil, $100 oil. We shouldn't be in a situation where these movements, because we should be well enough diversified, and we all know that, and it's been talked about for years. But in terms of where oil is going, I mean, I think people got prematurely optimistic, and we're not here to project oil, but we can't bank on getting oil back to $50 anytime soon. I mean, the news of the last few weeks has really been quite dire from a health viewpoint and from an economic viewpoint, because what it shows is that when you have these kind of draconian lockdowns that stop all economic activity and essentially create an economic depression, you may damp down the health issues at the time. But as you open up, because other places also have flare-ups, it transmits from place to place to place. And we're seeing that in multiple countries. So Israel has seen a big spike in cases. South Korea, which was viewed as the poster child for the good management of COVID-19, has seen a spike in cases. Problems in Melbourne. Problems in North Westphalia in Germany. And of course, the United States, we have record number of cases in Texas, Florida, Arizona, for example. So all of this just shows there is no easy path economically, health-wise or economically, out of COVID-19 in the next period that we can foresee. So it's very difficult to bank on any kind of increase at oil price. Of course, obviously Brent is up. I think it hit the teens back in April, but we can't bank on anything better. We're going to have to than we're at now, and it may get worse. So we really do need to make sure that the country can manage through without assuming any increase in the oil price.
The World Bank just sounded an alarm that the Nigerian economy could slip into a deep recession. They're saying we should expect a deep recession because of COVID-19 and oil. What are your thoughts about that economic outlook?
Well, I mean, I think we've been saying for a long time. First off, we didn't want to put out any numbers because we're not sure. I mean, as an economist, I'm not sure how to model the situation. We've never been in this
In a
situation
pandemic,
in my lifetime. So, and people were putting out. If we go back to the economic history of this pandemic, what we see is late February, you had groups, I think, like the World Bank that said, this was a concern. It would reduce global growth from 4% to 1%, 4% to 2%. I mean, that was widely off the mark. I mean, I heard one prominent economist in March, late March, say that the worst case for South Africa was, zero flat economy. And now we're looking at numbers for South Africa in today's World Bank report says shrinking by 8%. I mean, in the Nigerian context, we had minus 4% now, I think is what the World Bank is saying, possibly as big as minus 9%. We as PwC have said we have not used the word forecast because we don't know, we're not smart enough to know how to forecast. We've put out to our clients and in our meetings with them that we think that there's a range of minus 5 to minus 10% shrinkage in the economy in Nigeria this year. And that seems to be where the World Bank is headed too. So this is catastrophic, as we know, and we're going to have to figure out a way to manage through this. But to put this in context, in 2016 we had a severe recession in Nigeria, and the economy shrank by 1.6%. And of course, we all know, so 1.6% may not sound that bad, but for those of us who lived through it, it's very difficult. But also because the population's growing. So population's growing 3%. The economy shrank 1.6%. That meant that income per capita shrank by almost 5%, which is very difficult in the starting point of Nigeria and the level of poverty we have, the level of unemployment we have. So now we're faced with having, let's say, if the economy shrinks 7%, we still have the 3% economic the population growth. So we have GDP per capita declining by 10%, which is just extraordinary for us. And of course, I think now we're all realizing how challenging economically it is and the kind of policies. Now, in that context, I don't think oil is going to give us any relief because, as you just said, we're seeing all of these flare-ups of COVID-19. There's no possibility, as far as I can see, or now I think any serious commentator, of a V-shaped recovery. There may be an L-shaped recovery, which, basically at some point we may come back. But now people are talking about, for example, Qantas announced layoffs, but it also said it was taking its largest planes out of service for 3 years. Because even as we come out of it, what is going to be the new normal? There are all sorts of changes in behaviors affecting commuting, affecting travel, affecting the hotel industry, the airline industry, the cruise industry, for example. And these are industries that may never come back. And of course, a lot of these industries rely on oil. They use oil. So if we have a permanent dent in demand of oil, are we ever going to expect to see $50 or $60 oil again? And when we finally see it, of course, if it's 3 years down the road, the population's another 10% bigger. So oil's become an even smaller part of our economy. So all of these things just add up to, it's a critical time for Nigeria, to be able to put together an economic structure that really is fit for purpose for the post-COVID-19 world. And what we had pre-COVID-19, we all knew was not fit for purpose. It's going to be even less fit for purpose in the way the world changes as we come out of COVID-19.
If you just joined the show, hello, you're listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info. I have the chief economist at PwC Nigeria on the show with me, Andrew Nevin, and we're talking about oil and gas in Nigeria. We started off by looking at NNPC's audit. I told you that in 2018, NNP's refineries generated 3.45 billion naira in revenue, but gulped 160.13 billion naira in expenses. That was our big hard fact. So can they be made more productive and efficient? Well, from the things you're hearing from Andrew Nevin, oil may not be the answer. Now, any economic shock is bound to affect the government's fiscal position, Andrew, and that's especially true when it's an oil shock. Currently, the Nigerian government spends over 90% of its revenue and on debt servicing. So clearly, and it's one of the things you mentioned when you were talking about Nigeria pre-COVID-19, there isn't much revenue left to spend on interventions to save the economy. What are the options that we can begin to look at? What options are available for a government in a recession if it doesn't have much money to spend?
Well, I think that you're exactly right. So if we look around the world at the developed countries, so countries like Canada, the U.S., Germany, the United Kingdom, they have a fiscal stimulus that's at least somewhere between 10 and 20% of their GDP. So if we had a similar size fiscal stimulus, it would be about 15 trillion naira, in addition to normal spending. But that is not feasible already. So, what we're looking at in Nigeria, according to the official numbers, the last ones I looked at, is the budget is very rough terms. Spending from the federal government would be about 10 trillion naira. Revenue would be about 5 trillion naira. That may be over optimistic. So borrowing at about 5 trillion naira this year instead of 2 trillion. Obviously not sustainable. The only way out is for the economy to start to grow. And of course, I talked about the recession in 2016, but we also had, as we came out of what people said coming out of the recession, we had very anemic growth in 2017, 2018, 2019, which was lower than the population growth. So essentially, we continue to get poorer per capita, certainly in 2016 and 2017 as well, 2018, 2019. Of course, we're going to get much poorer per capita in 2020 and 2021. The only solution for the economic growth, if we had to really put it in kind of one key point, people refuse to invest in Nigeria. So just to put a number on it, the amount of investment, if we wanted to grow at, say, 6 to 8%, which is what PwC has said should be the target, we would need investment, gross capital formation in economic speak, of about 26 to 29%. But we're only getting 15 to 17%, so about 60% of what we need. So the question is, why are people not investing in Nigeria? And I just don't mean foreigners. To begin with, why are Nigerians not investing in Nigeria? Why is the diaspora not investing in Nigeria? And then finally, why are outsiders not investing? And of course, we all understand the potential. So, I spent a decade living in China. I went there the first time in 1983, so I experienced the world's greatest economic transformation in history, lifting of 400 or 500 million people out of poverty. Absolutely extraordinary. So, but now Nigeria is the second potential greatest transformation in economic history. And we have negative interest rates in Europe. We have zero interest rates, 0% in the United States. And yet people refuse to invest in Nigeria. So unless we can solve that fundamental issue, we're not going to be able to move forward. Now, if people wanted to invest in Nigeria and the potential of Nigeria, we would see a flood of capital in, and things happening kind of at every industry, every part of the country. And that's not happening. So I think that's the issue that we're recommending the government go back to fundamentally. It's been on the table. We've discussed it, but now it's so dire. We, obviously 2020, we're not going to see a lot of investment, but we need to be prepared, and we need to be in a position where people want to be part of the Nigerian story in 2021, and that's the only way out of the place that we're heading to with COVID-19 right now.
Because I'm thinking about, debt servicing gulping almost all government revenue. And it's kind of a vicious circle, it's a vicious cycle. Government ends up borrowing more each year because it doesn't have the money to do anything except pay off debt, So are you saying that investments into Nigeria is how this cycle ends? Is Nigeria in serious danger of a default, or are we going to end up going to, say, the IMF for a more comprehensive debt restructuring program?
Well, I don't want to be on television quoted as saying we're going to the IMF, but I think if you just in terms of, obviously the sovereign can create naira, right? So you can't default to your own currency. The borrowings and foreign exchange borrowings are not that huge. So I don't see a default issue. But what this highlights, though, is the government actually has no resources to invest in projects, which is fine because the world has tons of resources. As I said, zero interest rate. But when we invest in Ajaokuta steel, when we invest in these the scarce government resources going into these refineries are essentially wasted, which is just it's tragic for the country. What the federal government should be focused on is how can we get these small amounts of money invest in the country. I mean, what the total amount we need invested is probably, I'm sure my numbers are off now, I haven't recalculated recently, but say $100 billion US in dollar terms. How do we get that amount of money catalyzed for the country? So the few $billion that the government has invested in these things is a drop in the ocean compared to what we need. So the issue is not what can the government invest, because it cannot invest anything but a tiny fraction of the requirement. It's how to catalyze other people to invest in the country. So then the question I come back to is, why are these people not investing in the country? Why would someone take their hard-earned money and earn a negative return for sure?
Do you know
in
why?
Germany?
Do you know why? Let me ask you
well,
why.
I mean, we've been clear. I mean, I think the PEBEC, Dr. Jamoke and her team at PEBEC have done, heroine's job in that, but she's worked so hard at this with her team to make it easier to do business. But the reality is that there's still too much complexity and too much cost in doing business in Nigeria. So, if you think about, for example, the single window idea of PEBEC, so business can deal with a single window. It sounds fine, but the problem is it goes deeper than that. Why does someone have to? Why are there so many MDAs, overlapping responsibilities, increased costs? All the MDAs need to be financed, which means they put pressure on their business to kind of extract more resources. So, what do businessmen do in that case? Well, they opt not to invest in Nigeria. And as I said, it's not just foreigners. Nigerians don't invest enough in Nigeria. So they choose to go to Ghana, they choose to go to Kenya, they now increasingly choose to go to Ethiopia. Of course, Rwanda has done very, very well. But it's extraordinary that Ghana, at 1/7 our size, at 1/6 our population, I believe, it gets more foreign direct investments got more foreign direct investment in 2019 than Nigeria. And unless we solve this issue, we'll continue to have these real problems and get poorer and poorer. And COVID-19 is just accelerated. So if you go to the period 2017, 2018, 2019, it was this slow drip. We were growing at 2%, population was increasing at 3%. So you have this slow squeeze on incomes and increasing poverty. COVID-19, of course, has turned that slow drip into
a splash,
a torrent, a flash flood, right? So there's nowhere to hide for the country unless we fundamentally economically restructure. I don't want to use the term restructure in the political sense, but economically restructure. We're not going to find a solution. So some of the things that we've talked about over the years, and I think others talk about the same thing, is just a decentralization of economic decision making. I mean, we have a country of 200 million people, 36 states. Every state has its own peculiar or particular economic advantages. It's very difficult at the center. I mean, I think the experience has shown the center is not able to kind of sort out how to help states develop. So really, states need to take it on themselves to develop, and they all have different plans. And some governors, I think, are starting to do an outstanding job on the development of their states. I'll cite just one, not to miss out on others, but His Excellency Governor Al Rufai in Kaduna, a very clear economic way forward. But we need 36 states that have that clear plan and have the room to be able to implement that. It's hard to see Nigeria being economically successful unless it's happening at the local and state level.
From what you're saying, I can see that you think that Nigeria's dependency on oil and gas for its revenue is quite the precarious position to be in, because you have a government that depends on oil and gas for its revenue. Separate from that, our economy may be diversified, but oil and gas still dominates as a source for forex, right? So do you think that we're seeing an end to oil and gas on the horizon? If you think we are, how does Nigeria adapt?
Well, I mean, to begin with, I guess we've said for a long time that we're not really an oil economy. So there's this illusion. I mean, when I came to Nigeria back in 2008, I mean, I learned this term, the cake economy. How do you share the cake? But I think what's happened really, and I'll give some numbers to it, it's a cake economy. It's not really a cake economy. For a while, I was calling it a cupcake economy. And then I said, it's not really a cupcake economy. It's a cookie economy, right? Because this cake does not exist, right? So if we go back to I think 2018 or 2019, I hope I have my numbers correct, and please, listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of those years, the oil price was quite reasonable, $50, $60. The NNPC sent $12 billion US to the Federation account. Now that sounds fantastic, $12 billion. The only problem is there's 200 million Nigerians. So $12 billion coming out of the oil and gas, the state-owned oil and gas industry, turns into $60 per Nigerian. And that's just, you're not going to be able to, we're not an oil economy in effect. I mean, if you take, again, I'm Canadian, I mean, we do 5 million barrels of oil a day, and we have 38 million people. In Nigeria, we do 2 million barrels a day, and we have 200 million people. And in Canada, we don't even call ourselves an oil economy. So this myth or illusion that we're an oil economy causes a huge amount of damage. I mean, what we've had is a situation where, to some extent, the oil flows can support the federal government bureaucratic infrastructure. But I mean, the Emir of Kano, or the ex-Emir of Kano, or the ex-CBN governor, who was actually how I came to Nigeria to serve the CBN and serve the governor back in 2009. I mean, he said it very clearly: the cost of governance is not sustainable. So when we have $60 per person per Nigerian coming out, I mean, it's just not very much money. And I think that we keep repeating, please stop calling us an oil economy. And in terms of the actual FX flows, we put out our paper last year that said the biggest FX flow is diaspora remittances, right? But the difference between diaspora remittances, and in which the number we had, the official number is 25 billion, but it's very difficult to know because so much invisible flows, Aboki, individuals trading. But here's the difference between the oil flow of FX and the diaspora flow. The oil flow of FX ends up at the CBN and in the hands of the government, right? And they have control of it. The diaspora flow ends up in the millions and millions, in the hands of millions and millions of Nigerians, and pays for feeding and school fees. But just mathematically, the only thing preventing a balance of payments collapse in the country is the diaspora flow, not the oil flow.
As we wrap up, I want to come back to oil and gas. The new NNPC boss, you mentioned him earlier, Melekiari, he said he wants to bring down the production costs of a barrel of Nigerian oil. I think you mentioned that point earlier on as well. How much of Nigeria's problems, both in oil and gas and in the wider economy, are due to operating inefficiencies? And as an economist, what do you think are the practical steps for making a system like ours produce more efficiently?
Well, I mean, I think it's, this is a very high cost place to do business, right? I mean, if I had to contrast it, if you think of the country that should be in a way the most similar to Nigeria, it's probably India. Many of the same issues in Nigeria: big, complex, messy proto-democracy. You have different topographies, ethnicity issues, and yet in India now, I mean, they really, since about 1991 or 1992, have took off economically. If you're in India, things are highly efficient, and the cost of something is probably a third the cost of a similar thing in the UK, whereas in Nigerian context, often a similar thing is higher than the cost in the UK. So we obviously have, a cost problem in that, and I think everyone in the country and everyone on the listening today knows the issues around it: infrastructure, power problems, roads, and then governance issues that kind of overlay on all of that. So we're all well aware of that, and there's no easy fix. I guess but the good news, if I look at this, is, as I said, I think India is a great example. And sometimes I'll be in at conferences or listening to people speak, and they'll talk about Singapore and they'll talk about South Korea as models. I don't think that's helpful at all. India is a very good example where in 1991-92, it didn't have manufacturing. It struggled with power. It had poor infrastructure. How did it get turned around? Well, one of the first things that it did, people who are old enough may remember, in the 1990s, where they started their exports was in exporting services, software, business processing, outsourcing. Now, why is that so fantastic? Well, because you can export without having to go through a physical infrastructure, right? So we cannot in Nigeria in the short term be competitive at all going through the port system in Nigeria with our power, with our infrastructure. But we can export Nigerian brains sitting in Nigeria. So let me give you a couple of examples. I mean, Google has really been expanding its presence, its development presence in Nigeria. It's those of you who know the head of Google West Africa is brilliant Nigerian, Juliet, on that, absolutely fantastic, and that's great. But even better, I mean, Juliet's wonderful, but even better is this company, Outsource Global, which was founded by Amal Hassan, who's from Kano, but her company operates in Abuja and in Kaduna. I think it has about 1,000 seats now. So that means there's 1,000 educated Nigerians that are serving multinationals and their clients in the UK and the United States, either call centers, business processing, outsourcing, coding, some legal services, in some cases, legal support services. And those people, so they're bringing in foreign exchange into Nigeria. They're allowing an educated Nigerian to do well here without having to emigrate. And I think that's where we start. We try to export Nigerian brains without having to actually send, without Nigerians leaving the country. So I would put that on the table as the strategy that we should be pushing, because I don't think it's realistic. I mean, we talk about this sort of export-led strategy. I mean, obviously, I think we should be expanding agriculture and the agricultural value chain and agro-processing. But in terms of exporting physical goods out of Nigeria, I just think that that's a lower value-added thing than exporting Nigerian brains while keeping the young people in Nigeria. So that's our contribution to the national strategy right now.
Okay. Andrew Nevin is the chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Andrew, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure having you on Hard Facts.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sandra.
Okay, Lagos, you've heard from Andrew, and now I want to hear from you. What do you think of the things that he's told us today? What do you think about the NNPC refineries running at a loss and gulping hundreds of billions a year? Do you think that the refineries should be privatized? What do you think about the World Bank warning us that we are headed for a severe recession, even though Andrew said that he's going to be more modest than the World Bank is currently being? Do you think that there's a way that the Nigerian government can escape the debt trap? 0700-993-993-993. Just before I take your calls, we're getting reports that the former governor of Oyo State, Ajimobi, is dead. We'll bring details of that story to you as soon as we have them. You're listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info. We're streaming on Facebook, so please share your thoughts with us. Facebook is Nigeria Info 99.3. Twitter is at Nigeria Info FM. Let's talk. Hello.
Hello, good evening, Sandra.
Good evening. What's your name, sir?
Yeah, my name is Joseph.
Joseph, welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, I learned a lot from our guest. So he spoke about the role of government in all of this, and he spoke about the role of the government agencies in all of this too. I was dying to ask him about what role can the people in Nigeria, what role is there a role we can play in all of this, and if there is, what role can we play in all of this so that we can get better in our refineries?
What role can the people play, like you and I play?
Yeah, like you know, I don't want to put all of my hopes in government. So
unfortunately, we don't have control of the NNPC and the refineries, but we voted the government in, and so I guess the things that we can do is demand better legislation through the representatives that we have in the Senate and the House of Reps, right? So those are the things that we can do, because at the end of the day, government still calls the shots as far as those organizations are concerned. The only power we have is with the representatives that we have voted into office. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for calling me. I appreciate it. 99.3.
Hello.
How are you?
My name is Tawida.
Welcome to the show.
I want to ask a question. Is there anything that the government is doing to support SMEs that are in tech?
SMEs in tech?
Yes, like I visited one in 2018, and what they were doing was really great. So the company Facebook CEO visited when he came to Nigeria, Andela, to be precise.
Okay.
So I think they have a lot of potential that they can export to the global scene, and will make Nigeria a great thing.
So you think the Nigerian government needs to start to invest in young Nigerians who are in tech?
Yes, like India, for example.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, I'm 16.
okay.
So
Hi.
what they do there really inspired me. And I'm thinking of furthering my career in tech too.
Oh, fantastic. I wish you all the best, and I hope you do great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for calling Hard Facts today, Lagos. I'm going to take more of your thoughts. You're listening to Hard Facts on 99.3 Nigeria Info. I am Sandra Ezekwesili.
Hard Facts will be right back.
Welcome back to Hard Facts with Sandra Ezekwesili.
I'm Sandra Ezekwesili. We've got WhatsApp 080-959-75805. We've got Twitter at Nigeria Info FM, and we've got Facebook Nigeria Info 99.3. Sandra, there is fraudulent activity going on freely at Nigerian refineries and those in charge. If Buhari government understands what they're doing, how can the Minister of Petroleum explain that you spent 50 naira to generate 3 naira? Does it make any sensible idea to approve such funding into negative and unproductive local refineries? Unfortunately, if same refineries get into private sector hands, they'll overturn the loss to a profitable business for investors, which shows a massive corruption that needs EFCC and forensic investigation as to how money has been spent. Minister of Petroleum Products needs to explain a lot here, because this looks like just 3 project to me. Okay, Olaide Cruz, thanks for sending your message in. Hello, Sandra. Okay, no, I think I've addressed that question. We've got this person who's saying, how can NNPC make profit when you steal billions of dollars and acquire a Dominican passport? All right, thanks for sending your message in. We've got this person who says, if the interview can be uploaded on social media platforms. Well, yes, this interview is on our Facebook. It's also on our YouTube. And Facebook is Nigeria Info 99.3. YouTube is Nigeria Info FM. Hello. Sorry about that. 99.3. Hello.
Hello, Sandra.
How are you? What's your name?
Fine. My name is Wale.
Welcome, Wale.
From Yanoworo.
Welcome.
All right. So the interview was interesting. I did my best to ensure I listened to every bit of it.
Good.
One of the striking things for me, because a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So the first time we are getting a properly audited account of the NNPC operation. That is where any company that wants to rebrand, and reorganize and restructure, you start by auditing, so you know where the problems are. And by the time, even if we are selling those assets now, we will be selling them to people with capacity. Because you already understand the problem, you know where the losses are, and then you'll be able to, key into solving those problems. So kudos to the government for at least initiating the first ever audit of that organization. It's a very huge one. It's a very huge one. And I think they should just follow through so that we can get benefit from this corporation. Thank you very much. Well done, Sandra.
Thank you, Wale, for calling me. 99.3. Hello, good evening. Sorry about that. On Facebook, we've got Toyosi Adekoya, who says that it's unfortunate that with all their publications and the revenue generated, including their expenses, our refineries are not functioning. That's why I see no difference between the present management of NNPC and its predecessors. All right, let's come back to the phone lines. Hello.
Hello, Sandra. How you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Oh, very well. Doing good. From what your guest said, it's very simple. I think what is next for this country right now, if there's anything we want to salvage, it is to invest in the education of the future of this country, which of course are the youths and the children.
Okay.
He talked about, exporting Nigerian brains. You can't export, half-baked brains. And the only way we could do that is to properly invest in education so that we continue to chunk out the kind of quality that the man was talking about. Apart from education, we have to take healthcare seriously as well. Majority of the Nigerians that are trooping out of this country today, they are running out because of three things: bad governance, lack of good education, and bad healthcare system. If you could fix that, and of course, don't forget our power, the energy sector. If we can fix that, this country has the potential to be super great. Thank you very much, Sandra.
Thank you so much for calling me, sir. 99.3.
Hello, Sandra.
How are you, sir? What's your name?
My name is Salaba.
Welcome.
I've been listening to the gentleman. There's only two things we have to do in this country: fix electricity and distill. Let me take you back to Babagida's regime. In the Babagida regimes, they banned furniture. The local guys use what they have. All of a sudden, somebody started importing furniture. Where's furniture today? When we are talking about economy, the issue is this: let us go back, look inward, see what we can get inward. Listen, my brother, sister. The guy was saying you were saying something about Harcourt and Kaduna. What's the difference between the two?
One of them is making money. The other one is not. That's the
what are we talking about? Why can't we close Kaduna down? Do we continue to lose money on Kaduna for how many years? Look, we know what to do. We will not do it. Thank you.
All right. Very cryptic comments. We know what to do. We will not do it. Lagos, that's why we draw the curtains on the show today. I'm going to hand you over to the sports gang. They have amazing sports coverage coming up. If you've never listened to the sports show on Nigeria Info, what are you doing, honey? What are you doing? I am back tomorrow at 3. Tomorrow we're going to let Nigeria rest a bit, and we're going to set our sights upon international stories. One of the stories that we will discuss tomorrow at 3 is this Ghana versus Niger situation with our High Commission. What's going on there? We'll talk about that tomorrow at 3 p.m. So make sure that you are right here when Hard Facts kicks off. I'm on social media as Ezekwesili. Let's talk online, shall we? And until tomorrow, Lagos, those were your Hard Facts. Good night.